Welcome to a series of lectures on macroecon. I am Sir Scarlett, and I will be the facilitator for this particular module. I think the first thing that we need to discuss is what exactly is econ? And econ essentially is the study of two things. It is the study of choice within the midst of scarcity. And here's what we know. We know that human beings have unlimited choices, or better yet, they have unlimited wants. And because of those wants, then they have to make choices because of scarcity. Scarcity means that there is a limit to the number of things or a limit to the resources that we have. And so we have to be making decisions about what to do with the scarce resources that we have. And that, in a nutshell, is what economics is looking at. It's the study between choice and scarcity and how people make decisions given this phenomena. Now, this leads us into another concept because there are two ways in which we tend to look at econ. So we tend to look at econ from either the micro level or the macro level. And here we have a diagram that illustrates the essential differences between both. In microecon, we are looking at the individual choices which are made by the economic agents within the space. Whereas in macroecon, we are looking at the totality of the choices which are being made by these economic agents. Given that we have just mentioned economic agents, let us use some models to ensure that we understand what is happening. So at one of the basic level, we have households. And households are going to be a primary economic agent. And households are going to make choices in terms of what they do with their resources. So what to do. But we also have another basic agent who is going to be the firm. And the firm also has to make choices about what to do with the resources that they have at their disposal. So here we now have an interplay between the household and the firm. So the household is going to provide some sort of resources to the firm, and the firm is then going to reciprocate by using those to provide something back to the household. So this leads us into the whole concept of the factors of production. So the factors of production. And when we speak about the factors of production, we're talking about four basic things based on the literature. We have labor, we have land, we have capital, and we have enterprise or entrepreneurship. So these factors of production are owned by someone. And typically, we assume that these are owned by the household. So the household is then going to try and generate some sort of income by providing services to the firms. So in other words, what we are saying here is that the household is going to provide the labor, the land, the capital, and the entrepreneurship capabilities to the firms. And the firms is then going to be making use of these factors of production to provide final goods and services. So final goods and services, which are then going to be consumed or purchased by the household. Now, for each of these factors of production, based on who owns it, there's some sort of factor income. So we have something known as factor income. So this is going to be money that is earned or generated by the use of these productive capacities. And we're saying that based on who owns these production capacities, they are going to receive some sort of income. That income is known as factor income. So there are four. We have wages, we have rent, we have interest, and we have profits. And based on who owns these factors of production, then that will determine the kind of factor income that they receive. So in terms of labor, when a household provides labor to the firm, then they expect to get some wages. When they provide land, and by the way, land is any natural resource. So it could be the physical land, but it could also be minerals which are embedded in the land, or oil which is embedded in the land. And the factor income associated with these natural resources is usually referred to as rent. So I have a piece of land and I am going to lease it to an organization so that they can do business. So I get rent. I have a piece of land. There is bauxite on the land. There is some business who wants to be able to mine that bauxite. So they are going to come to me for the use of that land. And in return, I am going to ask them for some rent for them to be able to make use of that resource. So I'm getting paid in terms of rent. That's my income. Then we also have capital. And when we speak about capital, we're really talking about the machinery that is going to be used. So the machinery or the equipment that is going to be used to facilitate the production process. And this capital, these machinery or equipment, they have to come from somewhere. And typically, we are making the assumption that there'll be some sort of loan that has been borrowed in order to facilitate the purchase of these equipment. And because there is a loan that has to be serviced, then there's some interest that is being generated on the loan, and that interest is going to the lender. So the lender is earning interest in terms of their factor income. So for example, it could be that it's a bank who has loaned the money, or it could be private individuals who maybe come together and they lend that money to the business. And so they are expecting to get some sort of interest on their money. And finally, we are saying that the act of entrepreneurship is also an important factor of production, because it's the entrepreneur who organizes the resources and who takes the risk so that the firm can be profitable. And what they are seeking to get from it is going to be profits. So we have the factors of production, which are used by the firms to produce final goods and services, which are then going to be consumed by the household. Now, this concept of final goods and services is important because what we are looking at here is the final product. So we are not concerned about the raw product. That's not what we are capturing. We want to capture the final product. So here's an example. In order to provide bread to the consumers, we have to use flour. The bakery has to use flour. The bakery has to buy that flour from someone. And when they purchase that flour from someone, they would have incurred some cost to purchase that flour. But at the point that they purchase the flour, we're not trapping that. What we are going to do is we're going to wait until the bakery bakes the bread and sells the bread. And then that is the final product that we are capturing. And the reason for this is simple. We don't want to double count because at some point we are going to want to be able to have an appreciation of the amount of production that has occurred within the economy over a given period of time. And that's something that we're going to discuss in one of our lectures when we look at things like GDP. So just to quickly reiterate, economics is the study of choice, given that there is scarcity. And there are two forms of economics where we have microecon and we have macroecon. Microecon looks at the individual decisions which are being made within the marketplace, whereas macroecon is looking at the totality of the choices that are being made. And this terminology is going to pop up aggregates. It's going to pop up over and over. And when we talk about an aggregate, we're talking about the sum of. So whenever I talk about it, sometimes I'll just put a plus and circle it to mean the sum of all. So it's the sum of all things which are happening in the economy. Now, what are the different economic problems that macroecon is trying to resolve? Let's have a look at that. Now, bear in mind that we are saying that macroecon is looking at the sum of the choices which have been made. And so there are three important things that macroecon wants to grapple with. One of the things is growth. We want to ask ourselves, how well is the economy doing? And in order to determine that, we are looking at the production of goods and services. And what kind of goods and services? Well, we have mentioned that before. We're talking about the final goods and services, the ones which are being sold to the consumer. So that's what we're looking at. And we want to ask ourselves, for a given economy, is the economy growing or is it stagnating? In other words, are we producing more goods and services which can be offered to the marketplace? That's one of the problems which we want to grapple with from a macro level. The other thing that we want to grapple with from a macro level is the whole concept of inflation. And when we talk about inflation, we're talking about rising prices. And it's the rising prices overall. Because once again, we're talking about aggregates. And remember, aggregates mean we're looking at the sum of. So we are looking at all of the prices within the economy. And we're asking ourselves, generally, are the prices going up? Are they staying the same? Or are they going down? If the prices are going up, then it means that inflation is going up. And what this does is it reduces the purchasing power. So it reduces purchasing power. And the impact of the reduction of purchasing power is that consumers are going to be able to buy less. So as the overall prices rise, as consumers, our money, our purchasing power is going to be devalued. And so we are going to be able to consume less because we are able to buy less. So macroecon looks at inflation and looks at ways in which we want to keep inflation stable. We don't want prices to be rising too fast or to be dropping too low. The third thing that we are concerned about from the macro perspective is the concept of unemployment. In other words, we want to see how many persons who are of working age are actually able to work. And this is typically denoted as a ratio. It's the ratio of those who are willing to work and are able to work over those who are able to work. So it's the ratio. Now, we talk about being willing and able, and this is a concept that we are going to come across often as we talk about economics. Being willing to and being able to. So when we look at unemployment, as we mentioned here, we're looking at those persons who are willing to work and are able to work. So able to work, they must be of the correct age to be able to work. So for example, a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old is not able to work based on, legal definitions because they are not supposed to be employed in the workspace. So they are not able to work. No, we can have persons who are able to work, but they're not willing to work. So for example, we can have persons who are 20, 25, etc. They are able to work, but they are not willing to work. And therefore, we don't want to capture them and say that they're unemployed. Because if you're not willing to work, then even if the work is there, it means that you will not take up that opportunity. So we want to measure those who are willing to work and those who are able to work. And we want our unemployment levels to be low. In other words, we want lots more people to be employed because the more people are employed, then it simply means that we should be able to produce more goods and more services so that it can be consumed by us and by the world. So we have basically looked at all the elements which are here. We have examined macroecon. We have differentiated between micro and macroecon. We have looked at some of the problems which are to be solved by a macroecon. And we have created a basic model so that we can understand what is happening within the space by looking at the factors of production and how those factors are being used to produce the final goods and services, which are then going to be consumed by the household. Just to further iterate, before we close though, that when we look at the household, we are looking at the totality of all the households. So we are not looking at the choice of one single household, but we're looking at the choices made by all of the households in terms of labor, land, capital, enterprise. And also, we're looking at the collective decisions which are being made by all the firms. And this will capture all the final goods and services which are being produced within the economy. And finally, when we look at these metrics, we want to look at the metrics within a particular period of time. So it's important that as we examine the metrics, we are looking at it within the ambit of a particular period of time. And this will allow us to do comparisons and so on as we look at how things are progressing from period to period. All right, so that's it for Unit 1, and stay tuned for Unit 2.